have been inundated with messages about how important it is to study hard and work hard, and how perhaps pursuing traditionally safe fields like law, engineering, and medicine will open doors to future success. It might, but it might not. For some of you with a passion in another field, many doors await to be opened, as long as you're willing to open them. For some who decide to follow whatever their parents, their friends, or their teachers want of them, you're destined to meander through a life of misery. For others, some of you may be better off if you run into a wall of disappointment, especially when you bet the house on a single plan and it doesn't come through. I'm not advocating that you don't go after what you want. Quite the contrary, actually. Just be sure you know what you want, and go after that. Don't fall into the easy trap of doing what others think you should, simply because that's what the traditional route of success looks like. I say all of this not to deflate your celebratory mood, but because I almost didn't discover my own passion until it was too late. Here's my story of rejection and how I got here today. To understand how I got to where I am today, you first have to realize how I did not get here. I didn't get here because I'd always dreamed of being a journalist. In fact, at WCHS, I was determined to become a psychologist. I studied hard, I even took some independent projects and took some psych courses through the high school. After that, I spent 4 years at the U of A studying psychology. I even joined the Undergraduate Psychology Association, volunteering in hopes of beefing up my resume. I have to tell you, at the end of the 4 years, I thought I was a shoo-in for graduate school. I applied to some of the top schools in the country, the University of Toronto, the University of British Columbia, of course, the University of Alberta. As a backup, I picked Brock University, which I hadn't really known much about, but a friend told me if you could walk and talk, you could get into Brock. Well, according to that assessment, my high school teachers failed me miserably because I didn't get into Brock. I didn't get into the U of T or the UBC, and even the U of A, which I'd spent 4 years at, said no, try again next year. So what happened, and what did I do wrong? Well, like some of you who might receive rejection letters in the coming months if you decide to go to university or college, you may never know. To this day, I still don't know. They just simply send you that small, thin envelope which you hate to open because you already know the answer before you've ripped open the envelope. But a funny thing happened on the way to misery, which for me consisted of taking all of those rejection letters and posting them up above my desk as a daily reminder of how I'd failed at what I'd spent so many years working hard at. I'd kept my pulse on a hidden passion, and I concocted a third backup plan. At the same time, while I was cramming for all of those psych exams about Freud and his friends, I also started dabbling into writing. It actually started here at WCHS in a Social 30 class when my first published article was actually a letter to the editor of the Wetaskiwin Times Advertiser. My interest in writing then continued in university, where I was given a CD for free as long as I promised to write a review for the Gateway, which is U of A's campus newspaper. Now, some of you will realize in a couple of months, when you're sitting there in front of your IKEA bowl full of ramen noodles, trying to save as much money as you can, a free CD was quite tempting. From the free CD, I transitioned to free movies, and then interviews with celebrities so I could go see free concerts. Bare Naked Ladies, Shantu Kabiacha, people that were kind of big during my day, but you probably haven't really heard of now. From there, I also went and attended news conferences. My first big event was covering the G8 Summit, the Global 8 Summit, for those of you who didn't do quite so well in social studies. Which I have to say, I wasn't always an ace at myself. It was the first one, though, after the attacks of 9/11, so I got to meet with some interesting leaders of different countries from around the world. I used to stay up all night, until the middle of the night, sometimes until the next day, poring over press releases, chicken scratches in my notebooks, trying to come up with different articles for both the campus paper, but then eventually also C Magazine, View Weekly, and the Edmonton Journal. I found random ideas that interested me, like during a summer job one year, why was a local postman carrying around a pigeon with him every time he delivered the mail? Turns out it was a form of pet therapy. There you go, an article. Another one was looking at some of the homeless individuals, teenagers in fact, not too much older than yourselves, who lived on White Avenue in Old Strathcona and Edmonton. Honestly, I dug deeper into writing because for me it was an addiction, yet a therapeutic break from academia and psychology. That's why around the same time that I applied to all those graduate schools in psychology, I also took a chance and submitted an application to a school in Canada as well as one to the US. To my surprise, I did get into both schools, but even that didn't go completely smoothly. I got into the one in Canada, but the one in New York University, I was put on a wait list, which basically is a nice way of saying if other students decide they don't want to go to that school, then you get in, which is what happened to me. So even though I wasn't their top choice, I somehow managed to sneak in. For me, these kinds of rejections have been humbling. They've also taught me to fight for what I really want. In fact, once I got into NYU with the complete support of my parents, I was able to Much to my surprise sometimes, having spent so much tuition dollars on psychology, I got a call to interview at Psychology Today magazine. If I aced the interview, even though it was only an internship, it would have been a dream come true for me. But since I was new to the city, the editor I met with basically said, "You're new here, you're from a small town I've never heard of before in Canada. Who even knows if your degree is legitimate? Why don't you go, hang out in New York for a little while, see the city, and when you're ready, come back." So I did, and after a couple of months, I came back for another interview. And out of sheer determination, I got the gig. I spent about a year there working for Psychology Today, which kind of culminated in an ironic point when they asked me to fill out a graduate guide for undergraduate students who might want to pursue a lifelong career in psychology. Go figure. And that was when I realized that was a fascinating part about journalism. I could combine my interest in psychology with my passion for writing. But while Psychology Today and other publications throughout the US took a chance in publishing my work, I also received plenty of rejection letters. Here are a few. There's a newspaper on Staten Island, which some of you may have heard of. It's essentially the place we like to call in New York, the prison where everyone goes if you don't want to live in any of the other boroughs. They said no. Entertainment Weekly, which I thought was a little bit of a joke because, hey, they've got really tiny articles, you just need to know a little bit of pop culture. I'm a shoo-in there. They also said no. Even the Edmonton Journal, after having spent a full year at NYU, when I sent in my application for a summer internship program, kindly said no. So what did I do? Well, with those rejection letters, I filed them away, and I used them as motivation to open up other new doors. In fact, after facing more than my fair share of rejection, I took a chance and applied to one of the most competitive internship programs at what's now the largest newspaper in the US, the Wall Street Journal. Somehow I got the gig. Typically, they like to hire people who come from maybe Ivy League schools, have a business background. I came from neither and had neither, but what he liked most was that I came from a small town, had an interesting story, and was curious about things about psychology in the marketplace. It was the best moment of my life, and also the scariest. Here I was, walking into this gigantic newsroom, one of the most prestigious in the country, just a small town kid from Wetaskiwin. So what did I do there? Well, to survive, I relied on what I'd been taught while I'd been growing up here. Be nice and build on what you know. I started out by writing about the NHL and its lockout. I then switched over to everybody's favorite donut and coffee chain, Tim Hortons, to talk to you about their expansion there into the US. Eventually I realized the Wall Street Journal was crazy enough to actually publish my work, and so I continued pitching new ideas, more US focused than Canadian. I then spent 5 years working at a sister publication, a magazine called Smart Money. It was during this time that I was lucky enough to be invited to speak on different news programs, CNN, ABC, the likes that have already been said, but the funny thing is each time you go up there, you're faced in front of one single camera and perhaps a news anchor person. So I have to say, this is actually the largest audience I've ever spoken at before, which is quite intimidating. Last fall, my wife and I decided to give up our job security in New York City and start a new adventure in the Middle East. I now work as a business reporter for a newspaper called The National, based in Abu Dhabi, which goes out in Abu Dhabi as well as Dubai and the other United Arab Emirates. It'd be an understatement if I said it's been a fascinating time to be covering the Arab world, especially given so much unrest in countries like Bahrain, Oman, Syria, Libya. And although I'd like to think that I've been successful so far, I know that there are plenty of rejection letters headed my way in the future, and I welcome them, because I'm confident they'll only lead to other, perhaps completely unexpected opportunities. So if there's one thing that I'm hoping that you take away from me today, it's that you should be prepared that as soon as you walk out those doors for good at WCHS, you're going to be faced with rejection. But how you handle those moments will shape your career. And that collection of rejection letters might just be enough to get you invited up here one day in the future to speak at somebody else's graduation. So until then, I wish you the best of luck. And again, 2011, congratulations.
On behalf of the graduating class, thank you, Mr. Neil Palmer.